Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm glad that you chose to be with us and not with the agriculture panel. It was the correct choice. Thank you very much. I know that this is the panel that is between you and the lunch break, so I will move on to the substance and welcome on the stage our distinguished panelists. At first, I have to say that for the first half an hour of the panel, it will be just the four of us because Susanna Karp is on her way. Sadly, she had problems with her flight. So we're going to start without her. I'll still say that she's the founder of the Cleantech for CE. And I would like to welcome Mans Nilsson, Executive Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute. Ludovic Voet, Confederal Secretary of the European Trade Union Organization. And Jakub Safiański, Head of Energy and Climate Change Department at Konfederacja Lewiatan. Okay. So let me start by saying a few words of context. Of course, the first panel was very much about establishing the background and the discussion that we are here. But, well, as you can see from the color theme of this panel and this event, it is still very much focused on the green. But the European Commission has, in recent narratives, moved on from green to clean. And the world has changed since the European Green Deal has been announced. It was announced in 2019, and a couple of things happen. A pandemic on a scale that we haven't seen in 100 years, a full-scale war in Europe on a scale that we have not seen since the Second World War. And the history is not slowing down at all. And in the last couple of weeks, we can all agree that decades happened. And so the change of narrative from the European Commission is not a surprise. We have to now focus not only about how much things cost, but also where they are produced, who is supplying them, and is their supply certain. It doesn't only concern the new clean technologies. The old dirty ones are also impacted by this, and where our security lies is not necessarily determined by the fact that we produce something, but also where our energy comes from. And Europe, as it is now, is not energy self-sufficient. So I would like to start by asking our panelists about the challenges that Europe faces, and specifically European industries. We have with us Mans Nilsson, who is from Stockholm Environment Institute, which is an organization that has truly a global scope and is active on basically all continents. So I would like to start by asking you, in this uncertain time, does Europe have to go with its clean transition alone, or can we count on some kind of partnerships in shaping our industry's future?
Yeah, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here, and very excited to follow on the very good panel this morning. As you say, Pavel, this is SEI, where I work, is a kind of global institute. We have research centers, the headquarters in Stockholm, but we have centers in both the US, the UK, Estonia, Thailand, Colombia, Kenya. So I usually want to try to start with a global perspective and the bigger set of challenges that we're facing, which is, of course, that in the global scheme of things, Europe today now stands for about 6% of global emissions. We talk about greenhouse gases. Shrinking ever since decades. 20 years ago, it was 15%. Now we're down to 6%. This can give you two types of conclusions. One is like our Danish friend Björn Lomborg said in his recent, this is like the climate skeptic Danish analyst that has a lot of media attention. If we go to zero emissions, it will only impact global climate by this tiny bit, negligible bit. So that's one way to look at it. But of course, that doesn't solve the crisis of climate and environment. So faced with a decision, then what do we do instead? There is always no answer. So we have to come up with the other option, which is, of course, to ignite the transition in a way that not just Europe does it, but that other countries also follow. This is very much the key for me. And how do we make a global collaboration where people are interested in following what Europe is doing? One thing is learning and seeing the good example, to see that we can combine strong economy and a welfare society with decoupled emissions. Like, for example, my country, Sweden, has reduced emissions by 40% since 1990. There's been many countries in Central Eastern Europe that has even more rapid decoupling, while growing the economy. I don't know actually how much during these decades, but significant decoupling going on. And to show this example, we can also show the industrial transitions ongoing with electrification of heavy industry, hydrogen, heavy transport, etc., where transitions are ongoing. So the example and learning from that, that can be a motivator. What is probably not a motivator is the way that the COP sessions have been ongoing for a couple of decades, which is to say, we hope that everybody can take a piece of this burden and we solve it together as a planet, as humanity. It is clearly not possible in the current geopolitical situation where everyone is for oneself. But showing what it can be done, and then of course we need sticks and carrots to come with it. And this is of course things like trade agreements, CBAM, finding ways to incentivize partners to engage with Europe in a way that drives the green transition forward. And particularly in trade, of course, you can have very great combinations of carrots and sticks. And thirdly, a big carrot, I think, is the kind of technology partnerships, technology sharing arrangements in specific industrial sectors that we are piloting today. For example, in a group where SEI is proud to be like the secretariat, it is a kind of a multilateral collaboration called the Leadership Group for Industry Transition, which was based on the idea that we can sort of export the know-how and the strategic vision around how to become fossil-free in heavy industry. And today it's co-chaired by Sweden and India. In the recent EU-India summit, it was mentioned, this Lead It program, it was mentioned by Ursula von der Leyen and Modi in their public statement as a promising way forward. I can say, I don't know if there anybody from India here today, but it was a tremendously long journey to get India engaged in this. But when they realized what are the technologies that are emerging in, for example, Sweden and Germany around green steel, around electrification of different industrial processes, cement, etc., this really ignited their interest to be part of it. And now it's about 20 countries, industrial and emerging economies, and about 20 companies with a task to drive technology partnerships, joint ventures, public-private partnerships to move towards quicker, rapidly accelerating sort of investments in zero carbon or net zero plans for the heavy industry sector. This looks very promising to me. I know there are many other of these sort of initiatives that really provide an incentive. And then there are challenges emerging in this transition as well, but I'll come to that in the next round of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just a quick follow-up question. Do you see, you have been participating in this process for many years, and do you see this as like, is there a danger that with the drive for improving European competitiveness, reshoring, bringing production to Europe, is that an obstacle to those kind of international partnerships? Or is it something completely different and we're still going to need partners in many parts of the world?
Yeah, it's a very important question, because I think there is a risk that we take that reshoring too far. And of course, we have to build security and resilience through onshoring and more domestic supply chains. But we also build peace, security through interdependence. It's not totally dead, this idea of actually having trade arrangements and mutual dependencies and collaboration across countries. But we have to be more intelligent about them, I guess, and selective.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to move on to Ludovic. You, from the perspective of trade unions in Europe, I think recently there has been a kind of growing realization that Europe is not only like a completely immaterial economy that doesn't really produce anything but only focuses on services, that the industry, European industry, is still there, providing a lot of important jobs in many regions and producing a lot of stuff that a lot of people around the world want to buy. And I'm wondering if, from your perspective, do you view this drive to decarbonize industry, to move it more towards new technologies or new sectors, do you see it as a challenge or an opportunity for the social model that those jobs provide in Europe?
Yeah, thank you, Pavel, and thanks for the invitation. Thanks for providing this discussion. For us as trade unions, I represent the European Trade Union Confederation. So for the Polish audience, the three confederations in Poland are member of ETUC, so the Free Trade Unions Confederation. So we try to bring the workers' perspective in the discussion on. Of course, here on industry, on climate, and it's and your point is my starting point in the discussion to your question is that it's both a challenge and an opportunity, for sure. It's a challenge because it's not only the decarbonization question that is driving the problems in industries. When we look at the situation in industry, we are, if we are in fact emitting less than 40 years ago, it's also because there has been massive delocation of industries from the EU that went to China, where or in Asia, which means that the emissions are still done, but the jobs are not anymore in Europe. If we look at the level of job destruction in industry since 2008, we are at an average of 500 jobs a day. This pace is confirmed since 2019, since the COVID-19 crisis, and this pace is confirmed since June 2024 with, and even more because we think we are at the beginning of a wave of disindustrialization in Europe if nothing is done properly. So this means, well, this is clear in the steel industry. This is clear in few industries that are struggling with either unfair competition, either corporate decisions that were on optimization on profit. And this cannot be tackled in the same way. So unfair competition has to be tackled through the trade response and the job protection response, while optimization of profit is another question that is not easy to tackle, but where the question of fairness of do these redundancies should happen or not is the key question. And that's where trade unions, from the start, I've said at European level that we are not opposing climate action because both it's also an opportunity. Well, first, climate change is a threat. So already the whole world sees it, but we see it more and more in Europe. You might see the floods, you might see the drought, you might see the consequence of this on key countries. Just to name one example, Slovenia 2 years ago had 1 week of flood, and it destroyed 33% of, in terms of infrastructure, the destruction represented 33% of the public expenditure for the year. 8% of the GDP of Slovenia for that year. So that's happening. It's also happening in industry. It has consequence on industry. In France in 2023, during the summer, key nuclear energy producers had to stop because the water was too hot. So during all the summer, so it's also a question of energy supply. Climate change is already affecting our continent. But then the question is, how do we want to drive this decarbonation? And decarbonation cannot only be to offshore the production outside, and it cannot only be attracting highly productive industries. It's also about maintaining the jobs that are already there in Europe. It's about having a business case for the steel industry that risks disappearing the 2 next years if nothing is done in Europe. It's also protecting, so it means protecting jobs. So we need to reconcile the question of decarbonization and the social model. That's why we are in favor of climate action, but we are happy that we are speaking more about industry now than before. It's not a taboo. It's about, yes, how do we make sure that the strategic industries that are in Europe, they also have a case to continue in Europe and to provide quality jobs. Because if they are outside, then we don't have the quality jobs neither. So this brings me to the dimension of potentially, the discussion on trade, I think shows also the difficulties now is where there's maybe the job dimension is overlooked for me, because when we only answer to trade measures by trade measures, we do not protect the jobs. So if there's a tariffs on automotive or tariffs on steel by the EU, and that we answer by taxing Harley Davidsons and Bourbon, the workers from the steel industry or the automotive industry will not produce tomorrow Bourbon. So the question of, yes, trade measures are needed, and we might not be the ones who want to impose the tariffs, because this is not maybe our philosophy at EU level. But yes, then there's also a dimension, what happens with these jobs. Let's protect also these jobs from unfair competition. And this is missing from the EU level answer. So yeah, long story short, I'll come back later maybe on the EU policy response with the Clean Industrial Deal, which is maybe a starting point for this, but it's vague on the commitments on how will it deliver really reindustrialization in the EU with quality jobs at the center. But yes, we need to act, we need to go forward, but for this you need a timing that is that we can discuss. We have to go to climate neutrality by 2050, but then we have to put the objectives that are coherent. But then you cannot only speak about objectives, you need to speak about the financing that comes with this, because private and public financing may have a role there. And if you don't speak of all of this in all the sectors, specifically with decarbonization pathways that are credible, that then you also speak about what does it mean in terms of reskilling and upskilling of workers? What does it mean in terms of occupations? How can the worker have future in their region, in their industry? This is a key question to build the social acceptance for the transition. And we want to be in that kind of discussion, not in the discussion where people will just throw their vote against climate action.
Yeah, this is a very important point in terms of jobs. That I feel like it's often overlooked, that the green transition will bring jobs, but that they will not be in the same place. They will not necessarily be for the same people, and how we can address that. Like there is a regional component to this as well.
Yeah, and the risk there is that the industrial policy doesn't tackle this for the moment. We need a future for all regions. And because if not, the question of social acceptance will not be there, the question of fairness will not be there. Most key countries in Eastern Europe have already lost half of their young people that fled to Germany, to France, etc., to find jobs. So how do you build an industry in these regions and having a future for these regions if the workforce is not there anymore? So that's the quality jobs cannot, the job dimension of the green transition cannot be you have to migrate. We will not build social acceptance on that.
I think a lot of places in Poland that have experienced that definitely in terms of people just leaving by the whole towns or villages, all the young people leaving to work in Germany or in the UK. Okay, so yeah, I will use that opportunity to move on to Poland and ask Jakub Sawiański here for the Polish perspective. Are the challenges faced by Polish industries the same as in the rest of Europe? And what like, of course, it's a question with an underlying thesis. What's different? What's different for Poland?
Thank you. Perhaps, yes, a small chance to bring to the table a Polish perspective. I represent Leviathan Confederation, National Business Confederation in Poland. We represent many branches of economy, and usually we look at the economical phenomenon in a horizontal perspective. We put many factors in our thinking together. We aggregate the wisdom and the experience of our members from many branches of the economy. So I think it could be interesting to hear something from us too. Thank you for bringing this Polish perspective here. Let me start from some personal remarks. When I was entering, after my studies, the labor market in Poland, there was about 18% of unemployment. And in my group of the graduates, it was about 35%. And as a law graduate, there were many law students. That time, I didn't have any chance to get the job, a paid job after graduating. So now we made a tremendous progress, having an economy of full employment. And we would like to keep it that way. I wholly agree with all my heart what you said, that we need jobs and high quality jobs. And we firmly believe that the green transition will bring those high quality jobs, good positions in the value chains, innovations, and it will help us in the long run to progress even more as a country. Let's talk Draghi for a bit. The Draghi report brought many interesting remarks on the lack of competitiveness in Europe, of the risk and threats, but also Draghi mentioned something more scary. If Europe fails the competitiveness race, then many qualities of European life are at risk, like a social order, welfare, access to education, even the rise of populism. So if we fail, the risks can emerge that for now, for the time being, we cannot even imagine. That's why we should really do our best in Europe to develop our own policy, to keep high-quality jobs here, to think of ourselves as Europeans. Remember the ancient Greece with all of those city-states scattered with many conflicts among them. They fought all of the time. But when there was a threat of Persian invasion, they suddenly came together. They started to think as Greeks. We are Greeks. We have our own culture, philosophy, way of life, perhaps. Now, perhaps we have this Greek moment here of reflection in Europe. What we really are? Where are we going? The threats are rising. The Donald Trump's tariff policy is emerging and soon will cause some trade disruption with regard to automotive sector. Automotive sector is a power horse of European economy, a shining example of the quality of European workers and good management. But those times are probably gone for good. Now the automotive sector is between hammer and anvil. We considered hammer, this very nasty trade tariffs that will be imposed soon on European automotive sector. And US is the major customer for our exports in the automotive sector. It will hurt our business, our automotive sector, for sure. What we consider also as a hammer or an anvil was the competition, rising competition from China, for example. A good competition is not necessarily a bad thing. It could be good for the prices for the final customers, for innovation race, but we do not compete on the same level. We are much handicapped in comparison to China and their, for example, labor conditions and the level of state aid that can be raised in that country. So we envy the Chinese way of delivering wonderful cars, but we are worried that the qualities of, for example, working conditions that are here in Europe, our conditions are better, and we not compete with China with their lower costs of production, for example. So basically, I will come to a conclusion that we need to preserve what we have. We need to be smart. We need to be decisive. The times for discussing and talking is long gone. The black swans are flying all over us, more and more of black swans. And we need to be really decisive to act. We do not. We can talk about everything. We can put everything on our policy papers and feel better for a moment. But there is a time for action because it is the last time to act.
Thank you, and I'd like to welcome Susanna, who had joined us just in time for your intervention. So I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to let you any time to settle in and move on immediately to a question for you. You have launched recently a new organization, Cleantech for CEE. So maybe you haven't heard the whole discussion, but so far the mood has been a little bit grim, focusing on the challenges. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your ideas for opportunities of the clean tech sector in our region in Central Eastern Europe.
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference, for having me here, and apologies to all of you for being so late, especially to my fellow panelists and the moderator. I realized I might repeat some of the points you've already shared, so please excuse me for that. Indeed, you're right. We've just launched Cleantech for Central and Eastern Europe at the start of this week. And if you allow me to tell you a bit of a story, I don't know how pressed we are by time, but I see it's quite a long panel, so maybe just 3 minutes, because it's been a really interesting week, exactly answering the question you've raised. So not only have we launched on Tuesday here in Warsaw, looking effectively at the link between clean technology uptake, clean technology innovation, and scaling in Central and Eastern Europe, and the broader aspect of clean air in the region. Because of course, one thing is to add a lot of extra demand on the electricity grid, let's say coming from other forms of innovation, software development, data, quantum computing. You add that to the grid, and then we all know that this grid is carbon intensive, the most carbon intensive in Europe. And so is that stopping the energy transition? And so our vision is that it doesn't need to, but that's why the energy transition actually needs to happen even faster, because we do want to be competitive, and the region does have to offer leadership in this space in Europe, but therefore we can't afford for all of this extra demand to be added on, and for us to keep delaying the energy transition, we therefore need to transition even faster, and it is possible. I will go into how that's possible. But just the following day after our launch on Tuesday, I had the pleasure of being invited to the European Parliament by the chair of the Industry and Energy Committee of the European Parliament, who's a Polish member, Mr. Boris Budka. And the conversation was very much on how clean can this new industrial deal be? And does it need to be clean? And I was pleasantly surprised to hear really a large majority of those in the room, including representatives of Polish businesses, speaking very strongly in favor of this deal needing to be clean, or else it won't actually advance our competitiveness. And it also might come at the cost of Central and Eastern Europe if it doesn't stay clean. Why is that? Well, let's just take the ban on ICEs that has been agreed in the EU Green Deal for 2035. We know that if this ban will be extended further, if there's a 2-year delay on it, we know that those cars that end up on the secondary market in Central and Eastern Europe are the heavy polluting cars from Western Europe. I'm thinking here of older generation diesels and so on. So we're actually prolonging something that needs to be happening much faster if we care about also the public health of, our broader region. So all the linkages that have been made this week are linkages that I think are extremely valuable. And I've also been speaking to cities in the region. I spoke to the city of Poznan, where they said to me, why is there a bit of a backlash in Brussels on ESG when we see that ESG is actually growing in Central and Eastern Europe? There are people who've been trained in ESG over the past 5 years. They're keen to work on it. Investors are keen to work on it. I have investors coming to the city council saying we want to invest in ESG. Why is Brussels moving away? And so I really think that Brussels moving away doesn't need to be that way. I think Central and Eastern Europe knows very well that this is the industrialized region of Europe where scale in clean technologies can happen to the benefit of our economies, to the strengthening of our resilience when it comes to supply chains, energy security. So I think we have to become the big players that we were always meant to be in Europe, at least ever since, and here I refer again to a Polish member of the European Parliament who's first introduced the notion of the energy union. This is Mr. Jerzy Buzek. When he proposed this is a Central and East European idea. And it was always about strengthening resilience. It was always about creating more localized, regionalized supply chains so that we are actually in a stronger position. That this idea has been in it from the start, and of course with the climate crisis, new dimensions were added to it. The climate crisis isn't going anywhere, everyone can see that, it's only getting worse and worse. And so I think this is a huge opportunity right now with the Clean Industrial Deal for our region to really play the role it was meant to play in Europe. And unfortunately, so I can stop speaking soon, but unfortunately there are issues affecting the clean technology uptake in Central and Eastern Europe. But at the same time, we do have competitive advantages when compared to Western Europe, not least in the field of skilled workforce, a tradition of engineering that's very strong and present in the region, and also just access to land. Because when you look at France, I mean, Amazon was struggling to find a warehouse for, this was like a famous example, they couldn't find space anymore. The population density in Belgium and the Netherlands is really high. I mean, they're still very good on innovation, and I'm not saying they won't be good, but the point about scaling, if we want to compete with China, if we want to compete globally, well, scale will happen in Poland, it will happen in Romania, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, us working as a region. So I'm happy to stop there and to take further questions as Pavel indicates. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us. Once again, you came just in the right time, so no worry about that at all. And I think we managed to keep the conversation going without you for a minute. So we talked now about the challenges, and the title of the panel is about Clean Industrial Deal. So I'd like to move on to a second part where we will talk more about the European response. And I would like to come back to Mans. I started by asking about your kind of international perspective from your organization, but I would like to maybe come back to a little bit of a more local perspective, because Sweden has been a kind of home of a lot of very promising innovations in the clean tech space, and very promising, like still very promising developments in terms of clean industry, and also not kind of compromising on quality jobs. But recently there has been some hiccups, and the best child of European new business, Northvolt, have filed for bankruptcy in Sweden only this month, and before that in the US. So what are the lessons learned from that, and how the European response, like how can we do better to support those industries in the future? And also this is relevant for our region because we are a couple of steps behind, but we're gonna get there.
Yeah, thank you. This is if you find yourself in Sweden, this is like a little bit the elephant in the room discussion, that there's been tremendous investment in sort of climate smart innovation and new companies established, particularly in the north of Sweden, northern Sweden, where we have a lot of space, a lot of resources, like natural resources, mines, affordable electricity, say access to cheap electricity even, tremendous difference in the electricity price between North and South Sweden, often a factor 10 actually, and can be even more. So that gave the sort of comparative advantage for companies and the state to go for a major innovation effort. And the prime example, you could say there are three prime examples. The first was in the green steel business with a publicly owned mining and power and steel company forming the Hybrid Consortium, which is building a pilot plant and is still a sort of running on schedule. Quickly a competitor came, totally privately driven, called H2 Green Steel. They changed their name to something more easily pronounced, called Stegra now. Stegra is building green hydrogen electrolyzer facility and as well green steel production in the north, in another town in the north. And they are both running on sort of, they have risk, sort of public guarantee, risk guarantees. They have offtake agreements, which means they have already sold what they will produce 5 years from now to certain companies. And this gives the security for the investors to go ahead and drive this work. And that, as I said in my first initial comment, was driving also this interest from Sweden for the leadership group for industry transition, and ignited interest from India and other countries in emerging economies. And in this lead, I will also say there's this green steel is perhaps the strongest example. Now, in parallel with that, and already a little bit before, a former executive from Tesla in the US came to Sweden. Well, he's a Swede, and he started the Northvolt venture. Northvolt went bankrupt last week. For me, it's important to not confuse this with the industry, the green industry track, because the Northvolt disaster is really about bad management, a sort of could almost a messiah-like figure with nobody stopping him at the level of the board. So we are 20 years behind China when it comes to battery technology. And in that situation, to aim for sort of world domination with your startup immediately and trying to sort of build factories all over the world, etc. It's just not how you do it. You start with one, make sure it works, make sure it's profitable, and then you expand. And that's not what they did. So they didn't even get the first one to function properly up in the north of Sweden. And then the deliveries were not functioning. They were buying manufacturing equipment from China, which was malfunctioning. Maybe it was something wrong. Maybe some conspiracy can be discussed. But this eventually made big, also like German automotive manufacturers getting out of their deals with Northvolt because they didn't want to. They didn't get the deliveries. So it sort of collapsed very quickly. However, this was bad business, but the sector and the overall strategic vision, I think, is still very much valid. But there are many voices now in Sweden that are trying to criticize or question whether this is a meaningful thing to do or whether these additional companies will also go belly up just a couple of years from now. Now, I don't see that at all in the figures, but what you do see is that with the European Commission slowing down or signaling slowing down implementation, the companies are reacting to that immediately and say, oh, maybe we should, we have the plan still, but maybe we should slow down as well. And some companies, like if you move to the automotive sector, like Volvo, Swedish car manufacturer, now 80% owned by China, I will add. They have committed to a full electric strategy very quickly. And now they find themselves sort of, well, we bet our company on this transition, and now Europe says, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, etc. So it's very dangerous, like politics, to have this kind of fluctuation. So these are the big, heavy, big manufacturing industries where it's a very dynamic period now. But I fundamentally don't see that the business case has changed for green steel, for example, where there's a price premium for it, but it's not that bad, actually. If you look at final products of a car or something built with green steel instead of fossil steel, it's a very minor addition to the full cost. But the last sector I want to mention is the bioeconomy. I'm very happy to learn that Europe is betting on revising and updating a new bioeconomy strategy, because I think this is where we're going to be able to get the whole of Europe, rural regions, rural areas involved. We have to replace fossil economy with a bio-based economy, and this means our plastics, our materials, our building materials, etc., should come from our bioresource-based. And this will create value for landowners, and land workers, and will build. I think this is the strategic vision for a more cohesive European Union, where the rural is also positively impacted by the clean transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have some positive and some negative examples of how the clean industrial deal can move forward. You mentioned that the main person from Northvolt had a messiah complex. I cannot think of a reason why he would get that working in Tesla. But moving on to a little bit south and back to Poland, we have a bunch of documents on the table presented by the European Commission. And, well, traditionally, Poland has not been very receptive to initiatives in the area of climate and energy. Of course, there are areas, you mentioned Jerzy Buzek, and there are areas where we can very smugly say, I told you so, or we told you so, in terms of, for example, the Russian gas imports. But generally speaking, we are not known for supporting a lot of the European Commission initiatives. So I wanted to ask you, from the perspective of Polish businesses, what should we be fighting for in Brussels in this new term where the driving force is industry and competitiveness?
Thanks. I'm tempted to answer that we should put more emphasis on lowering the energy prices. But why am I tempted? Well, perhaps some of us can have a conviction that the state can shape the energy prices, the European Commission can shape the energy prices, and ultimately those solutions will deliver affordable energy prices for everything. But energy and energy commodities are the subject of market supply and demand rules. And in our opinion, in the long run, the rule of the economy based on supply and demand should shape those prices without the excessive interference from the regulatory or European Commission or national bodies. And this is quite a dilemma, because there are times when the interventions are needed and are necessary. When the crisis emerged in Ukraine, the prices skyrocketed and the intervention was necessary. Afterwards, we should leave the energy price to the rules of the market flow. Why is it so? Because when we maintain those mechanisms of protecting everyone or some of the companies, for example, small and medium ones, from the market trends, we instill for the long term the hope and the expectation that the policymakers will always deliver affordable energy for everything, for everyone, in every case. And this is quite tricky to maintain, because in the long run, it creates many market disruptions. And it does not make any incentives for energy savings and for energy efficiency as well. So I'm tempted to say that the Commission should put more effort on bringing down the energy prices. But on the other hand, I am aware of the fact that there are many different market factors that shape the price of the energy. Coming back to Poland, we need to decarbonize as quick as possible our energy system. We're subject to ETS burdens, let's call it that way. And the sooner we get rid of coal, for example, as a base fuel for our power plants, the better for everyone, for the households, for the business. And I fully support our Ministry of Climate that we need to be bold, decisive, and we need to always stick to the facts. We agree. We have been shouting this for a long time as a Leviathan. The sooner we have green, stable energy in our grids, the better for everyone, for households and business in Poland. And also we should bring down the carbon footprint of the energy that we produce. This is the second aspect of the competitiveness. So what we lack in the document published by the European Commission is perhaps a more concrete way how to bring down the energy prices, apart from pushing this problem a bit to the national states and opening perhaps some more regulatory framework to bringing down the taxation on energy products. But it will depend on the budgetary issues, and as we well know, many of the European countries are highly indebted. So this is another risk that nothing significant will emerge from this policy. But the direction perhaps is good. Let's move to the specifics. We will be expecting them. Second thing is the lack of recognition of biomethane as a very important tool to replace natural gas by European Commission. I think this omittance is really difficult to understand to us, because we perceive biomethane as a very natural replacement of natural gas in the future. And we have in Europe much capability to produce biomethane using our own resources, with strong connection to agriculture waste, also promoting circular economy in many of the branches of economy, like beverages, food production, for example. So there are many opportunities here to achieve two goals. For example, the first goal, of course, is the green energy, and second goal is circular economy as well. So this is really magnificent result that biomethane can bring about. Why it is not there, I'm not quite sure, but as a Leviathan, we will be promoting biomethane, and we will try to raise the awareness of European Commission to the wonders that biomethane production can bring.
Definitely in Poland, we we have to doubt the way in which the market determines the prices of energy, because we have prices frozen for households, for example, and the energy companies in Poland are mostly state-owned, and also we keep burning our coal, which is famously expensive, even though there are cheaper alternatives. But definitely, like I understand the sentiment, and I'm also wondering what Ludwig you will have to say about this. But before that, I would like to move on maybe to Susanna, because the issue of prices and the prices for industry is very much crucial for development of new clean sectors in our region. And what Mans was saying about the cheap energy, cheap and abundant and green energy in Sweden, it's not something that we can easily reproduce here in our region. We are actually have one of the higher energy prices in terms of producing energy. So is what European Commission proposed enough to address those issues?
So to answer the question and then explain why, I also agree the European Commission has not put forward concrete proposals. So no, it hasn't done enough to address the matter. However, let's start with some good news, which is that some of you may be aware that this past Saturday, as electricity prices fell across Europe, Poland also had the lowest electricity prices in its history. So I won't go into how good or bad that is. I will just say a transition is underway. And what I think needs to happen and should have already happened in the EU Green Deal Commission is, first of all, we should have fixed the electricity market design. Because the reason why, even so, leading up to the full-on war of aggression against Ukraine by Russia, already in September 2021, Russia had started spiking up the gas price. And unfortunately, our electricity market design in Europe still determines our electricity price by the gas price. This is why right now we're in the situation that we're in with the highest electricity prices. So this was on the table in the last commission. It was the obvious fix because, by the way, if we're getting ready for a net zero economy, we're gonna have to fix the electricity market design. We can't have an imported fossil fuel determining the price of electricity for Europeans. And so why did we not do it in the EU Green Deal Commission? There wasn't enough support for it. And of course, energy companies are a bit cautious. And of course, this would create some sort of, disruptions in the way that we've planned contracts and so on. But now let's make it into a positive thing. We've gained some time by not doing it in 2023, but let's still plan so that it's done by 2030, because we're not going to be able to run clean technologies such as those that we have a competitive advantage in at this point in time in the EU, which, by the way, are all technologies which bank on electricity. They rely on electricity. They're going to be using electricity, right? So whether we're talking electrolyzers or we're talking wind, so it's connected very much to electricity and how we make even the steel for the wind turbines of the future. So we need to fix that first and foremost. Now, in parallel to that, not until, but in parallel, we also need to start changing our grid. Why? Because the grid of a country, or in our case of a continent, is the reflection of the political economic vision of that country or of that continent. When you look at grids in other continents, you understand that they reflect a certain vision, a certain dynamic, the trade routes, and so on and so forth. When I look at the European grid, I understand that Europe is still, stuck in the past for many reasons. We're not sufficiently connected, that is for sure. We're not connected inside a region, let alone across regions. And also we need to create more dynamic grids. So grids that actually, whether it's a European super grid that we're building towards, that, at any point in time I can access cheap, clean abundant electricity in Europe, and maybe electricity in the Czech Republic will be made in offshore in the Black Sea, but it's connected through the cable. I don't really know exactly how this will work out, but we need to just amplify, develop real grit for the grid, right? So real perseverance for this. Again, smart meters, this is something that actually everything around smart metering, energy efficiency, software for the energy transition, Central and Eastern Europe innovators have been very dynamic in this space. But again, we're not going to be able to fully amplify our dynamism, our competitive advantage as a region if the grids continue to be outdated. Now, the good news is there's fantastic innovation in Europe on grids, right? So there's innovation that could actually allow us to amplify our grid capacity 20 times by 2030 and save so much money in congestion costs that we could nearly be, when you look at the investment gap in the Draghi report, we could nearly make up for that investment gap with all the savings in the grid congestion that we could unlock, right? And last but not least, grids are, very much a public good. And so I could absolutely see a future in which we take the ETS revenues, which, by the way, are in the billions now that the carbon price has gone up, and we just massively deploy them for grids. Why? Because we're deploying them for a public good. Everyone benefits from that. So, all of this could be done by 2030.
Thank you. Definitely the issue of ETS revenues is a big topic in Poland and not really a well-tackled one so far. But I would like to ask you, Ludovic, of course, you are welcome to also respond to any of the other panelists. So far we have had quite a lot of agreement between the trade unions and the employers, which is not always the case, but I think it is a kind of an area where there is quite a lot of things that can work, in which those two worlds can work together. But I would like to ask you, because alongside the Clean Industrial Deal, the European Commission also proposed quite a lot on simplification, the word that is used in Brussels. In Poland, we have not that big of a problem with using the word deregulation a lot and throwing it around. So I imagine that in the trade union world, that must have rang some alarm bells, because this is usually what the term is for, firing people more easily. So how do you view those changes, and what do you think of this focus on simplification and it means for basically the European social model, and how do you view that?
Yeah, thank you. I will come to that in the end of my answer. So starting on the Clean Industrial Deal. Clean Industrial Deal for us is, as I said in the beginning, it's an important step forward, putting back industry discussions on how to concretely clean them. So decarbonize concretely while discussing sector by sector. So this is speaking about jobs, and there's a part of the Clean Industrial Deal that speaks about jobs. It's for the moment vague promises, but it's still important opportunities there on the question of quality jobs, the question of transitions having to be discussed with trade unions, the question of securing, trying to avoid restructuring, which is, of course, what we believe in. We don't have to only manage restructuring, it's also building a case for that not to happen in order to make the investment needs. There's the recognition of the financing part, the massive investment needs, while it doesn't provide really the financing need. And there's recognition also of if there's public money that goes to decarbonization, there should be also social conditionalities, potentially by European local content dimension in it, which is positive development, at least in the EU. We've never seen such important development in industrial policy before. So it's opportunities we have to transform into concrete reality. But yeah, first point, that is a problem for workers and as households and as workers. It's energy, of course, as mentioned, because energy is expensive at home and at work. So of course at home it's a problem for the bills we pay, and at work it's a problem for the jobs we have. So it's a dimension that is we're twice sanctioned when energy price go up. So there, maybe there we think for the moment the clean industry doesn't deliver. I agree on the electricity market design. It was a missed opportunity. We should have decoupled energy prices, electricity from fossil fuel, and this is still what has to be done because this is not really a market mechanism. This is what has driven the excessive profits that we have seen in the last few years, and these profits have not been reinvested in full investment in renewables, which could have then lower also the prices. So yes, there's a focus on development of renewables, very good, but this will not by itself deliver the reduction of cost that is needed on energy in the EU. And there's, for the moment, unfortunately, in the last few years, little that has been done also on energy savings, energy efficiency, and circular economy, which can also be a way in companies to reduce consumption and then also reduce the possible impact on jobs. Because this is the first obstacle that employers identify in terms of challenge, energy costs. Then one of the when there's survey about that, they say energy costs, they say lack of skilled workers. They do not say simplification. They do not say red tape. While the lobbyists in Brussels, they say that. But when there's survey about the real challenges for businesses, this is not the first point. And although, and that's where, coming to simplification, although we see the Commission advancing on simplification, etc., and we have no principal opposition to simplification, we have a principal opposition to deregulation. So if you can have a pro-worker, pro-business simplification that means that you still respect health, environment, and workers, there's no problem. Making paperwork for nothing doesn't add to a quality, doesn't make quality jobs. But for the moment, no company has said that because there would be simplification, because of the simplification offensive of the Commission, they would stop the redundancies they are planning. So there's no link in the challenges that we see in the industries in terms of massive layoff happening in key industries and simplification. Simplification will not be the decisive question. What can be a decisive question in to make the green transition also a social transition is to speak about, well, both. We need phase-in of jobs. At the same time, there's a phase-out of jobs. So we have no problem of speaking phase-out, but this means that you need the jobs that come at the same moment. When a company closes, if you wait 3 years to get an alternative, another company coming with the same, never with the same amount of jobs, with less amount of jobs often, but after the closure of a company in the industry, it's a whole region that is desertified. So it's a whole region where the supply chain disappears. It's a whole region where the public services are under difficulty because not financed through taxation. It's whole regions where a lot of companies disappear because of the consumption of the workers that were active in these industries. So you need to have phase-in at the same moment of phase-out. And that's where, yes, there are good estimation of that the positive role of the green transformation in terms of job creation. There would be more creation than destruction. But if it doesn't happen at the same time and in the same regions, then it doesn't work really for people. And that's where we need to make this happen. And the example of Northvolt, I think, is also, even if I agree with the mismanagement, but what it brings in the public attention is what we were said as workers as the sectors of the future we have to train for. They are not working. So we have to go out of sectors, the coal sector, for example, in Poland, where we are well paid, where we have good working conditions, to go to sectors we're not sure have a market. So that's a question of also planning a transition that people can believe in. And this then brings me to a second element which we need to develop is the matching between the labor and the social challenge of the transition. I explain myself. The social challenge of the transition is, of course, the prices. If everyone in the EU has to buy heat pumps, electric vehicles, and solar panels, and renovate their homes. This is a huge cost that 80% of the population for the moment cannot do. So this has, of course, a consequence in industry, because what we cannot buy, we cannot produce. So the question of boosting internal demand in the Clean Industrial Deal has to be reinforced. It's not the only way. Yes, we will still need to trade, for sure. But if we want to have an answer in a time of tariffs, of difficulties also with global competitors and with unfair competition, we need to make sure that we boost internal demand in order that people can produce in Europe, we can buy what is produced in Europe, so that we show that it's possible. But this should also lead to how affordable are these products, because key automotive industries have produced highly expensive SUVs, let's say like this, and they have closed. In Belgium, in my country, 3,000 jobs lost in Audi, branch of Volkswagen. But the choice of the EV was a 80,000 euro car. Was not affordable for even the workers that were well paid in this company. Final point for me, it's all the financing dimension, because there it's really if we do not answer this question, we cannot plan the transition. Financing is limited with the fiscal rules since last year. This is highly problematic. I think it's highly problematic because we are also damaging ourselves. The US is at 125% of GDP debt. China is now producing clean products in a lot of sectors because they invested a lot also publicly. They are at the level of the EU debt now because they invested massively. So the EU debt is at 80%. If you compare to 125% in the US, you still have a margin of investment. And it's not that the EU will fail. The EU will not fail. The question is if we have a comprehensive EU answer or if we stick to national ones. Then, of course, nationally, Greece cannot compete on the market. Italy, same problem. But if we have EU answers, and that's where I would advocate there that the fiscal rules for us do not work, we need a EU investment facility, that could be financed through common debt. Because if we look at the money from the MFF, we cannot bet that the countries will put more money in the MFF. There's discussion on new own resource. It will take years to deliver the resource. The only thing that can happen now is putting money through common debt. This is exactly also when you look at defense discussion. The only way to put money on defense was to have exemptions on the fiscal rules and was to put money through at the EU level through loans. So if we are serious about the money that is needed in decarbonization, it's the same type of answers that we need. And this has concrete consequence in the industries when the money is not there. So because if the money is not there, it will only be about markets that are highly innovative. But what I said at the beginning is that we do not have only to focus on bioeconomy, AI, etc., which might create jobs. It's also about, in the regions, maintaining the jobs that exist in the steel industry, in aluminium, in glass industry, where the EU has led these industries since decades, and where the question is not to lose them, it's to transform them and to clean them, so while maintaining the jobs in Europe. So I think there, without the financing part, if we do not find the money for the financing part, we will not deliver. And there, the EU for the moment over-focus on private investments. And private investments in the last years have been too low, and we cannot put this decisive problem of climate change in the hand of will the private investments deliver. This will not work.
Right. So any quick reactions to those points? Maybe I saw Susanna or Mans. Yeah.
Well, since we've been sharing various different views on what happened with Northvolt, I see the reference you're making to the implication on jobs, that we need to secure the jobs of the future, but I wouldn't say that's the main takeaway, at least not for me. That's not the main lesson from Northvolt. The main lesson for me, and just up until March, actually, I was working with Cleantech for Europe, where, of course, we were not involved with Northvolt. They were not a member, but we did follow a bit the case through our colleagues in the Nordics. And so what we noticed is that maybe the structure of the investment there was not the right one. And it was interesting because at this roundtable in the European Parliament this week, someone actually said, well, it focused so much on raising funds and getting investment, but it never focused on implementation, on actually producing a battery. It still hasn't produced anything. And so maybe the lesson to take there is to have some sort of conditionalities that actually require some implementation. Right? Because to me, that seems to be the biggest takeaway lesson. We might want to apply that to everything we do, well, whether we're going to, have new debt to finance this or not. And I agree with you that, there's an issue. We would like to keep all of these jobs in the sectors that you referred to, and the EU has been leading in these sectors. But the problem is it has also been cushioning these sectors from global competition by giving it, on one hand, EU ETS free allocation, and we know that EU ETS free allocation has not encouraged either innovation nor job retention. So, if we want Europe to do things better, to take more debt, but, we should also just be very realistic about what's gone wrong and seek to improve that. So I agree with, finally, the point that, it's very important to actually have those new jobs ready as we're transitioning from certain utilities, facilities that are closing down. And so especially in Central and Eastern Europe, we are actually seeing that there are factories approaching that point, and it's happening. But the problem is the cleantech ecosystem hasn't developed enough to be able to fully take this on, right? So here it's still a budding ecosystem. It's in its infancy. And so we need to really accelerate that and create the partnerships with the incumbent industry. And so it's happening in some places. You have some examples of the various hydrogen valleys. Universities have been involved. So I'm not saying it's never happening, but it has to be a wide phenomenon, not just exceptions. Here and there we have some success stories, but this has to be the sort of broader approach, the strategy across the region, exactly so there can be this matching, the pairing. The next generation industry is coming online as some of the industry that can no longer perform in an age that's not fossil fuel driven, then begins to sort of take on and recalibrate for the new economy. Thank you.
Right, so maybe we can move on to final 8.5 minutes of questions. So does anyone in the room have some questions to the panelists? Don't be shy. Well.
Okay, thank you. Alexander Śniegowski from Info Institute. I have a question about certain 100 billion euros which have just appeared within a few weeks in Germany for climate action. And I remember that a couple months ago we had discussions on Green Industrial Deal, on common funding, and you have this kind of long European process, and we have discussions on fragmentation of common markets, fragmentation of state support. And then suddenly within 2 weeks, maybe 1 month, we have this big announcement, big policy decision, which is good for climate. But how can we have a European policy, European response, joint response in this kind of two-speed Europe? And I'm not saying two-speed for countries, I'm talking more about governance, when you have long process on European level and then suddenly very fast decisions on national level. Do you have any comments on how we can manage this two-speed? Thank you.
Would like to take that on?
I would relate it to the fiscal rules, because when Germany makes this bazooka offensive on investment, in fact, the fiscal rules that were just adopted last year, first, this shows that they were not they were not good because they were not allowing the investment that are needed. So this is the first point. The problem is that it leaves only Germany with the capability to do it, but and not the other countries. That's why I was advocating for an EU investment facility for in order to finance cross-border grids, etc., as mentioned, etc., EU public goods, etc., etc., but to finance what is the need for decarbonation. But the key problem there is indeed that we do not have a European answer, and it's a little bit a two-speed Europe, because although I agree with the need for the massive investment in Germany, in fact, with this, there's estimation that in 10 years they are at 62 or 63% of GDP debt. They will go to 80 or 90, which I have no problem with, me personally, but it doesn't fit with the fiscal rules that were just adopted, pushed by Germany also, but it was a former Liberal minister that pushed that. So it means that while we are asking to France, other countries that are highly in debt to do fiscal consolidation, in fact, when it's a problem for Germany because the key investment in the infrastructure, both climate, social, roads, etc., have not been done, in fact, it's possible for Germany, but not for the others. But there we have to have a coherent answer in the EU.
I just had a very quick reflection, which is that at the, it's not at the symbolic level, but at the ideas level, I think Germany gives a very strong signal for the rest of the European member states to also think, what will they do? What do we need to do exactly at European level so that Germany doesn't outcompete us all the time? So I think it will actually dynamize the conversation, hopefully to get it to a point where we can have a European response exactly to avoid, big surprises or big, kind of increasing economic divergence and so on. So I'm taking this as a very positive signal for the whole of Europe because it's forcing us to have a conversation that we need to be having. So.
We lost one of the mics here, and if I could ask you also to stand up and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nils from the Danish Embassy. I think what I'd like to ask is that China's been mentioned a few times, but of course the ingredients that they use to cook up their successes are not available to us, right? The high focus on urbanization. You're seeing a lot of regions that are left completely behind in the economic transition, which you are pointing out, Ludwig, is unacceptable in Europe. You've also seen their access to financial markets being tailored to make sure that large factories happen, and regional governments have been rewarded funds directly for number of workplaces rather than final product, which is what you were pointing out. We should aim for something measurable. I think if you had the level of waste in Europe that you have with public financing in China, the people responsible would be for sure not re-elected, and is simply unacceptable tool. So with that in mind, what tools do you think are workable or usable in Poland, or not just in Poland, but in Europe right now, that could actually realistically create jobs that we are okay with having in Europe, rather than competing on labor costs with China, that without sort of having these externalities, these costs that we don't find acceptable in Europe?
Any takers?
Start. I'll keep it very brief, but there's many things we could be doing, and that's where the clean component of the clean industrial deal comes in, and how we define that is up to all of us. You've referred to waste. There has to be a big component on that. I'm seeing a lot of positive elements throughout the documents that have been presented, but also that will be presented. Does anyone in the room remember the term airpocalypse? That was referring to the terrible air quality in China that had resulted from exactly their industrial strategy. And I think that's also something that we're not ready to have in Europe. So the clean component of the industrial deal should actually be really strengthened, maintained. But I do think also on the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, we have an interesting instrument there that we need to preserve because it allows us to do much more with it, right? Now, that's also, of course, being pushed back, being threatened after all of as part of simplification. But of course, in principle, you could actually attach social conditionalities to CBAM. And in the previous term, there was a conversation after the green taxonomy to have a social taxonomy that the EU was going to develop and also apply to its investments the way it was going to apply the EU green taxonomy. Now, that has been dropped off the agenda in the last commission. I think there's a pretty strong rationale from a competitiveness perspective, if which seems to be the point where everyone agrees we need to act, to still have the social taxonomy, introduce it into CBAM, and then become, consolidate our global market power also by this. Just some thoughts.
So maybe quick reactions, and we can wrap up.
My first remark was to do, of course, introduce tariffs, but it's completely wrong road with many side effects. Not that we shouldn't follow this road, for sure. Why? You remember Gandhi, if we follow eye for an eye rule, then soon the whole world will be blind, and that will happen. And I will mention one fact: the automatization of the manufacturing processes in China, with regard to automotive sector, using robots, for example, cutting down the costs. I think this is very innovative what they are doing, and perhaps we can learn a bit from this Chinese experience of using less labor force. I'm sorry to say this, but in this term of this massive competitiveness, perhaps we should use more the robotics and digitalization of the manufacturing processes. I would put it that way.
Okay, Mans, would you like to have the last word?
Yes, of course.
Or second to last?
What's happening in the world right now and in Europe is, of course, the security dimension and the build-up of our total defense, which is civil defense and military defense together, and that this is the defining feature of the conversation for the next 10 years. Where starting in the early 2000s, we have worked a lot on how we can enable the green transition with the industrial competitiveness, with jobs, with a flourishing economy. And I think we were successfully making the case and building the political momentum, and it has sort of happened. It is a part of European and global conversation now. The next frontier needs to be the synergy between our security and the green transition. These are two major transitions that need to go in tandem. As Ursula said this morning, she's a politician, so she only talks about the synergies. There are a lot of trade-offs short-term, a lot of synergies long-term, and we need to really look very carefully at this in the policy analysis and research community to understand better where do these policy objectives go hand in hand and where do they not match up. Because that's what, security will always trump security will always come first, and I think there are good reasons for that. So we need to align the clean industrial transition with the security transition that we're all going through now. Thank you.
Okay, but very
really
quickly.
rapid, yeah. From the discussion we had in 1 hour and a half, I don't see simplification as the key challenge, in fact. So here we would just take an OECD survey. It's their indicator on product market regulation says that on the stringency of regulation, in fact, France, Germany, Italy, Spain are in fact more competition friendly than the US on regulation. So it's also to show that the discussion we have on simplification at EU level is maybe not really fact dependent.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. I would like to invite you to give them a round of applause.